Today's daf we're going to be learning is Menachot Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Debbie and Ellie, and Eva, Yael and Danielle, Aliza and Sam, Kobe and Dina, in honor of Barbara Goldschlag's 60th birthday. Also in honor of your dedication to Daf Yomi. Today's daf is sponsored by Jill Shames in loving memory of her mother, Sina Baker, Shifra Bat Bracha Vazala. We miss her wisdom, compassion, and strength, yet we are grateful in these days of uncertainty and threat. Distance and time no longer separate us. Am Yisrael Chai B'Kayim. Okay, a few quick announcements. A shir will be going up today that's relevant for Leila Seder from Yael Shimoni, Rabbi Yael Shimoni of Gefet. It's going to connect between something we learned on Menachot Samachvav and the Seder. So if you want something to listen to, you can listen there. Also, as I mentioned before, there's lots of materials on our there's a link you can get on our menu to learning for Pesach. Pesach learning opportunities. If you want to prepare, there's all different types of shiurim, some that you can listen to, some that you can be more active participants in really learning inside in depth with the sources and chavruta learning. You could just learn some of the dapim that relate to Leila Seder. It's all there on our site, different materials that we've collected for you from different shiurim they've been given throughout the years. The other thing is we're starting the Mako Challenge, which is starting right after Pesach, the week after Pesach on Monday. It's going to be like the other challenges, 4 days a week, Monday to Thursday, with time to catch up, with intro and summary videos of Rabbi Chamutal Shoval. So highly recommended if you want to review Mako, if you haven't learned Mako yet, or if you just have friends and family that you want to share with and get them excited about learning Gemara. These are opportunities for people who don't necessarily want to do Daf Yomi and want to start learning Gemara and understand what it's all about, or go back to learning Gemara if it's something they haven't done in a while. So highly recommended to pass this around and share it with your friends. We sent it out already. If you don't have the materials, you can let us know and we'll send out the promotional materials for it. Okay, that's enough introduction. Now we're going to start the 8th chapter. So before we start, our 8th chapter is going to focus on, right now we're going to focus on the Korban Todah, which is a Thanksgiving offering. We've talked about it many times before, but now we're going to really learn it properly from the beginning, how we know all the things that we know. Today we're going to figure out how we get to the fact that there's 40 loaves of bread. Okay, and we're going to talk about the breads. We've learned before that there's chametz. Remember, there's only 2 cases of chametz that can be brought in the temple. Okay, one is the shtei alechem, and one is the lachmei todah. Okay, so we're going to first look at some pictures because I went to the Menachot workshop at the Lechem HaPanim Institute where we baked the Lechem HaPanim, and we baked the Lechem HaPanim, which is not our topic right now. We also baked some of the different types of the Lachmei Todah that they had in the temple. So we're going to show you pictures of them. Okay. Also, they had samples out there that they made that they kind of preserved and show people. So I'm going to show you right now. I'm going to share my screen and show you some photos. You can also find it if you're listening. You can find links to it on the site or on the podcast app that you're using. So all the podcast apps have links. Other than I think Spotify, they don't allow links at all, descriptions. But if you have using any other, there should be a link right there in the details. So here's our picture of chalot lechem. Okay, there's 4 types. There's 10 loaves of each type. Today we're going to learn how we get there. Chalot lechem is basically the ones that are chametz. You can see it's kind of thick, really thick. We're going to talk about how many. We're going to see that the chalot, we saw this the other day, but we're going to see it now inside. The ones that were chametz were made up with a lot more flour, so they're much bigger than the other ones you're going to see in a minute. Chalot matzot, okay, these pictures have somebody's hand there, which helps give you a little perspective, someone's holding it, on the size of it, okay? Otherwise you can't really get perspective, but that should help you a little bit get perspective how big they are. Chalot matzot, okay, now we get to the types that are matzot. There's chalot matzot, which looks kind of like a pita. It's a bit thicker than a pita, and it's also not leavened at all, so it's a little, but it's kind of like a pita. Rikikei matzot, okay, now the chalot matzot had oil mixed in. The rikikei matzot didn't have oil, if you remember. You're moshchim b'shemen. Remember the chalot matzot blulot b'shemen? Those have the oil mixed in. This is the rikikei matzot. They look much more like a burnt lafa because they don't have any oil in it at all. This is where you would put the oil, moshchim it after, either in the X formation, or we saw some people thought you just put it over the whole thing. And then there's ravucha. We haven't really talked about that one much yet. This is a little like a bagel in a sense that it's boiled first, then it's baked, and then it's fried. That's why it's a little blackened from the frying. Okay, These are all, even though they don't look it, but they're all about the same size. Okay, all three of these should be around the same, should be the same size. Okay, we're going to see that later. So those are just some pictures to help you visualize what this is all about. Like I mentioned before, and I don't get any commission for this, but I highly recommend going to the Machon Lechem HaPanim, the Lechem HaPanim Institute, and doing this once, because it really changes the way you understand what we're learning. Okay, it brings it to life, and it doesn't just become some technical details, but you actually see it in reality, and it makes it much more meaningful. Okay, so we're going to start now with the Mishnah at the bottom of Ayin Vav Amud Bet. Hatodah Haytaba. There's also a study guide for today, which I will share also on my screen right now, actually. I'll share it, and it'll help guide us through some of the complicated parts of today's daf. Second part of today's daf is very easy. The first part of today's daf is a little complicated mathematic-wise. Okay, we're going to get into a lot of math stuff. Some of it's simpler, some of it's a little complicated. Hatodah Haytaba chamesh se'in Yerushalmiyot shehem shesh midbariyot. We already started talking about shiurim. Okay, we're coming up on Pesach. Everyone's always like a shiur, a kazayit, and the kazayit became a kibetza, doubled, right? That's what we eat, a whole large amount of matzah on Seder night. But there's basically, shiurim changed over time. What they're talking here is about the Yerushalmiyot and the midbariyot. Midbariyot means in the time the Torah was written and when they were in the desert. Okay, the se'ah in the time of the desert. Okay, the amount that you would use in this, which we don't know yet how they get to this, the amount of flour needed for the Korban Todah. Okay, let's actually do a bit more background now that I remembered. I wanted to talk a little more before we go to this, which is, why do you bring a Korban Todah? There's 4 reasons someone brings a Thanksgiving offering. One is you were sick and were healed. Okay, then there's 3 more, which are really apropos, or coming up on Pesach, reasons why, things that the Jews kind of did as they were leaving Egypt or after they left Egypt, which is you were in prison and got out. So that's kind of like they were enslaved and got out. Number 2, you crossed over a sea, crossed over the Red Sea, and crossed through a desert. Okay, those are all considered dangerous things. That was kind of after they left Egypt. They went through the desert and survived that. So you go through any of these things and you survive, you bring a Korban Todah. So now we're going to go through, and the Korban Todah, so it comes with an animal sacrifice, with the animals, which is a type of shlamim, but it's different than a shlamim in the sense that, right, you have to, I'll get back to that sentence in a minute. You bring with it 40 loaves of bread, which is atypical already for, right, shlamim is usually just an animal. This also comes with 40 loaves of bread, and regular shlamim, you actually have 2 days to eat it, and the night in between, day, night, day you brought the sacrifice, night, and the next day. But the Korban the Todah had to be eaten by that night, which also makes it very difficult because you have 40 loaves of bread that have to be consumed, so you have to share it with other people. Okay. Also, we're going to learn that you give 4 of those loaves to the Kohen. Okay, so that's today. We're going to get to all those details and where we get them from. Other than the time frame you have to eat it, we're not going to talk about that today. Okay, let's now share our screen, and we're going to see the different measurements. So it was made up of 5 se'in Yerushalmiyot, which is the measuring system they were using in the time of the Mishnah, which they tell you is equal to 6 se'im in the Midbar. What happened was, and I'm going to use this example because this will help you, they took a se'ah, okay, imagine we have a measurement of a pound, and let's say they decide one day that a pound, instead of a pound being a pound, we're going to call a pound, but we're really going to add another fifth to it. And we're going to say a pound and a fifth, okay, like 1.2 pounds is now going to be called a pound. That's basically what they did. They changed the measuring system. Okay, why they did this is a good question. We don't really know, but they decided to change it. So 5 and a fifth, basically, right? What we're going to do is we're going to take every se'ah is now worth a se'ah and a fifth. So if you take 5 se'im Yerushalmiyot, which are each worth 5 and a fifth, you're going to get to 6 se'im midbariyot. Right? You're going to say, so in the old system, it was 6, right? Well, we now call 5. Was actually at the time 6 because each one is now 1 and a fifth. So 1 and a fifth times 5 gets you to 6. Okay? Now, I'm already going to tell you the complicated part, which is when I just described it to you and the way we do mathematics, okay, that's a fifth, right? We added a fifth to every se'ah, and that's how we got to 5 se'ah now is what was 1 6. But the way they're going to call that, that's a 6th. Why is it a 6th? Because if you go to the end and you have now 1.5, let's put it in decimals. It's easier for me in decimals. 1.5 is basically, 1/5 is 1.2. Now, if you say that 1.2 is worth, what used to be worth 1 is now 1.2, what used to be called 1 is now 1.2, and you start, instead of saying 1, we're going to add a fifth, you say 1.2, we're going to take away how much to get back to the 1? A sixth. That's called, what we're going to call it in the words of the Gemara later, at the end of Amud Aleph, we're going to call it shtuta. Shtuta is a sixth, milevar, from the outside. From the outside, meaning once we add the number, when we figure out how to calculate how much this is, we're going to calculate it backwards from the outside, from once we add it. Okay, I'll give you another example. We've done this actually many times. We've talked about this. When the Torah says chomesh, right, there's many times where you have to add a fifth, like in Me'ila, or when you steal something and you have to add a fifth to it. Okay, there's different cases, like if you eat the kodshim of the kohen, you have to add a fifth to it. That fifth is actually a quarter, because a quarter is a fifth in the way they calculate it. Okay, so let's take an example of 100. Say you have $100 worth of stuff that you stole, that you used of hekdesh, and now you have to return the extra fifth. So if we add a fifth to it, okay, and we add a quarter in our language, we're going to get to 125. Now, if you take 125 and you reduce it by a fifth, you get to 100. So if you talk about it from 100, from the amount you have in originally, you're going to call it a quarter. But if you're going to do it from the whole number that you're going to get to, and you subtract it, you're going to subtract a fifth. So that's exactly what we're saying here. You're really adding a fifth, but it's called adding a sixth because they calculate it the opposite of the way we would calculate it. Okay, at least that's the way I would calculate it. Call it fifth. I assume you do it the way I would, but they did it differently. Okay, that's all. If you don't get it, just leave it aside and just take it as a given. Hopefully I made myself understood in the way I explained it. Okay, now we're going to move on and explain this mission. So the Toda, and I'm going to share my screen again with the measurements. So 5 se'im Yerushalmiyot or 6 se'im Midbariyot. Why are they telling you this? Because we're working off things in the Torah, but we're now in different measurement system, in the Yerushalmi system. So they have to tell you how it translates, which is shtei ephot. Okay, now the Gemara is going to have to get to how we know this, but this is 2 ephot. Now in the Torah, we keep talking about esronim. What is an isaron? An isaron literally means a tenth, but a tenth of what? A tenth of an ephah. An ephah was a measurement, which we're going to see now. Okay, ha'ephah shalosh se'im. Okay, so this is just simple math. If you have 6, now if we go along the measurements of the Torah, there's 6 se'im of the midbar, and that's called, right, an ephah has 3 se'ah, which means how many ephot with this made up of? Very simply, if an ephah is 3 se'ah, and this is 6 se'ah, right, se'ah is a weight, is a volume measurement. So if an ephah is 3 se'ah, and this whole thing is 6 se'ah, so it's 2 ephot. Now, how much is that in esronim? Okay, very simply, if an ephah is made up of 10 esronim, because an isaron is a tenth of an ephah, so 10 esronim make up one whole ephah, then you're going to have 20 esronim in the whole korban todah. Okay, so shtei ephot, ha'ephah shalosh se'im, they're telling you that, and esrim isaron, you have 20 esronim. Okay, 20 esronim in this whole korban todah. How is that divided? This we saw the other day. Asara lechametz, asara lematzah. So it's not divided evenly among the 40, which is what you would have thought. It's divided evenly among the chametz ones and the matzah ones. Remember, there were 3 types of matzah ones, so that's 30 loaves of matzah, and 10 chametz ones. So you're going to have 10 esronim are chametz. Okay, that's here. 10 are the chametz ones, and 10 esronim for all the matzot, which basically means 3 1/3 esronim for every matzah. Now, just to put this into terminology that you might understand, what an isaron is, okay, let's just go on one more minute and then I'll go back and tell you how much an isaron is in our language, okay, and something you would understand. Asara lechametz, isaron lechala, okay, so 10 isronim for the chametz. And since there's 10 loaves of each, okay, that's here, the 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 loaves of each. So if there's 10 isronim, very simply, 10 chalot, 1 isaron for every chala. Okay, now I'll tell you what an isaron is. Now an isaron is a volume measurement. But in translating it into, okay, the rabbis of later generations tried to translate it into things that we understand. So basically, there's a difference of opinion as always with shiurim, but the middle opinion, the one that we usually go by, which is, or the standard, is Rabbi, I think his name is Chaim Naef, I didn't get his name wrong, But he basically says it's a little under 2 kilo. It's like 1.9 something kilo. So that's almost 2 kilo, which is about 4 pounds. Okay, that's the amount of in each lechem. Okay, that goes back to the first ones I showed you in the picture. They're very big, 2 kilo. Okay, so that's a lot. Imagine if you make a batch of dough of 2 kilo of your challah, right? That makes about 8 challahs. So we're talking very large size. This is all one loaf of bread. Okay, now, uba matzah shalosh minim, chalot rikikim u'rivucha. Okay, that it says so in the pasuk. Okay, I'm going to read you the pasuk in chapter 7, verse 12. You're going to have to do with the slaughtering of the toda, with the animal, you're going to bring chalot matzot blulot b'shemen. We learned about these, right? They're mixed with oil. The rikikei matzot meshuchim b'shemen. V'solet morbechet. That's the third type, the rivucha. Chalat blula b'shemen. Okay, that also has oil mixed in. And then they're going to talk after that about the chalot lechem chametz. Okay? So the 4 types. So these are the 3 types of matzah. Nimtzeu, but now there's 10 esronim in the chametz ones and 10 esronim in these 30 chalot. So now they're going to do the math. Okay? If there's 3 types with 10 esronim, nimtzeu shlosha esronim ushlish l'chol mim v'min. Okay? So very simple. Divide 10 into 3. 3 and a third, 3.33 for each one. Okay? Now, shalosh chalot li'isaron. Now, in every isaron, okay, you can do the simple math also, 10 esronim is basically 30 chalot are made up of 10 esronim, right? Again, chalot doesn't mean chal, it means loaves, which here are matzah loaves. 3 chalot for each isaron, because 30 divided by 10 is 3. Very simple math. Okay, that's all in the language of esronim. What's the problem? The rabbis of the Mishnah didn't measure things in esronim. They measured things in a kav. Okay, kabim was their volume, their go-to volume measurement. They didn't have any saron. So what they have to do is they now have to translate this into kav language, a language that they understand. So b'midah Yerushalmi, now we're going to just do the same thing, but instead of using esronim, we're going to use a kav. Now, if we already learned, which we're going to figure out where we learned this from, because they didn't tell us, but the Gemara is going to explain, that an ephah is 3 se'ah. Well, we also know how much kav goes to se'ah. So a kav, 1 kav is 1/6 of a se'ah. So that basically means if we have 5 se'in Yerushalmiyot, which is the measurement they used in their time, we're going to multiply it by 6 and say that 5 se'in Yerushalmiyim, which is Yerushalmiyot, which is the amount they used in the entire Korban Toda, is equal to 30 kav. Okay? So now they're going to say, B'midah Yerushalmiyot hayush l'shim kav. Okay? Because that's just a known thing. It's known that a kav compares to a se'ah, 1 to 6. So take 5 se'ah, multiply it by 6, you get 30 kav. So how are we going to divide it? The same way, because we're basically dividing the same measurement that compared to, right, the same 20 esronim. We're going to divide now the 30 kav. Okay? How much is the 30 kav? So 15 l'chametz, 15 l'matzah. That's how it gets divided. Half, chametz matzah. 15 l'chametz. So if you have 10 loaves, it's very simple. 15 divided by 10 is 1.5. Kav v'mechza l'chala. So each loaf, 1.5 kav. 15 l'matzah, u'b'matzah shalosh minim, chalot rikikin u'rivucha. Now they're just repeating the whole thing we saw before. 15, but there's 3 types. So 5 kav for each type, because 15 divided by 3 is 5. Nimtzeu, 5 kabim l'chol min u'min, u'shtei chalot l'kav. Okay, they say it in a different way than I would have said. I would have said half a kav for each challah. Okay, because if you have 5 kav for each type, and 10 loaves, half a kav for each challah, they say 2 challahs per kav. Okay, there you have. Okay, that was all the measurements, and we're not done with all the complicated math yet, but that is all the measurements right now. So now the Gemara says, etc. Where do we get this from? Now, what they want to know is not how do we know that there's chamesh in Yerushalmiyot. We're going to get to that later. But what they want to know is, how do we know that this one thing we said before, which everything was based on, that an ephah is 3 se'ah? How do we know that? Okay, this could be a little bit, they're going to struggle a little to figure this out, and we're going to quote some psukim in Yechezkel that are very hard to understand. We're in Yechezkel chapter 45, Mem Hey, and I brought the psukim on the sheet. So, Menani Mile, Amar Rav Chisda, Damar Kra, Ha'ephah v'habat, tochen echad yeh. So here it mentions the ephah, and it also mentions another measurement called the bat. Okay, a bat was a measurement. And the pasuk says, Tochen echad yeh. They're the same. Efa and bat are the same. Okay, then the continuation of the pasuk says, Laseh ma'aser hachomer habat, va'asirit hachomer ha'efa. Okay, that ma'aser of a chomer, which we don't know what that is yet, is a bat, meaning a tenth of a chomer is the bat, and asirit hachomer is an efa. Okay, that's basically saying the same thing as before. If an efa and the bat are the same, and the bat is a tenth of a chomer, then also the tenth of an efa is the same thing. The tenth of a chomer is also an efa. Okay, but right now, let's pretend we didn't read that whole pasuk. So now the Rav Chisda says the following. Ma bat shalosh sein, afefa shalosh sein. How do we know what an efa is? Well, we know because Yechezkel told us that the efa and the bat are the same, and we know that a bat is 3 se'ah, which we don't yet know why we know that, but we know that a bat is 3 se'ah, so the efa is 3 se'ah. Okay, so that's Rav Chisda. Now the Gemara says, ubat gufa minan. How do we know, though, that a bat is 3 se'ah? Where do we get that from? That a bat is a tenth of a chomer, and a chomer is 30 se'ah, then we could say the bat is a tenth of that. 3 out of 30 is right? That, in other words, a tenth of 30 is 3 se'ah. Okay? Assuming we know what a chomer is. But you can't possibly say that we know the chomer is 30 se'ah, and the bat is then, right, a tenth of that, and that teaches us the fact that it says the efa and the bat are the same. We would learn it because efa nami haktiv vasirida chomer haifa. If we know what a chomer is, then we don't need the words haifa ba'bat tochen echad yeh to teach us that efa is the same as a bat and a bat is 3 se'ah. Because if we're learning 3 se'ah, that the bat is 3 se'ah because it says ma'aser of chomer is a bat, it also says in the pasuk ma'aser of chomer is the efa. So if we know what the chomer is, then we know what an efa is, and we don't need to know that the efa and the bat are the same. So, Ella, it must be chomer lo yadana kama, hachinami lo yadana kama. It must be the rabbis didn't know what a chomer was either. So, because again, just let's say this very simply. We wouldn't, the words, what did Rav Chisda say? It's all because of what Rav Chisda says. It's not the pasuk, it's what Rav Chisda said. Because how do we know what an efa is? Because it says the efa is the same as the bat. Now, it can't be that we know a bat is a tenth of the chomer, and the rabbis must have known a chomer was 30, because you wouldn't need the words haifa v'abat to be the same you wouldn't need those words to teach it to you. Rav Chisda just would have said, we learn it from asirida chomer haifa, and then we'd know, it's 3 se'ah. But the fact that Rav Chisda didn't say that must mean that Rav Chisda didn't know what a chomer was either. And if you pay attention, Gemaras that we've learned, we don't really usually talk about a chomer. A chomer is a shear. It's mentioned in the Torah, it's mentioned in the prophets. It's not used in the time of the Mishnah. So it's not a shear they really knew about. So therefore, they say that can't be it. Ela mehacha. So they go to a different pasuk, a few pasukim later in Yudalet. V'chok hashemen, habat hashemen, maaser habat minakor. Okay, when you take the maaser on oil, you take a bat from a core. Okay, so a tenth of a core is a bat. Now, a core, you might remember, a core is a shiur that we talk about all the time in the Mishnah and the Gemara. They knew what a core was. A core is clearly 30 se'ah. So now, notice that pasuk is only talking about the maaser habat. It doesn't talk about an efa. So that must be the source. Okay, so I'm going to read the whole pasuk now that they quote here. So again, maaser habat min akor. Okay, aseret habatim chomer, ki aseret habatim chomer. Okay, because 10 batim make up a chomer. Okay, basically it's saying chomer and kor are the same thing. From there we get to the fact that it says maaser bat min akor. That teaches us if the bat is a third of a kor is 30 se'ah. A tenth of a kor. A kor is 30 se'ah. A tenth of that is 3. And now go back to pasuk Yud Aleph, which is what Rav Chisda started with. The efa and the bat are the same. So basically, we prove from pasuk Yud Dalet how much a bat is, 3 se'ah. And then pasuk Yud Aleph tells us, which is where Rav Chisda said, that was all he said, efa is the same as the bat. It seems like Rav Chisda must have known what a bat is from pasuk Yud Dalet. Okay, because the rabbis knew what a core was, so that taught it. Okay, that's that section. Now we're going to move on to another section, which also talks about numbers and all that. Amar Shmuel. And at the end of this whole discussion of Shmuel, we're going to then bring it back, close it up with something it says in our Mishnah, which is going to be the same thing. And this is where the 5th and the 6th come into play. So Shmuel says, Ein mosifin hamidot yoter mishtut, this sugya we learned already in Perek HaZahav, the 4th chapter of Bava Metzia, where we learn about ona'ah, which is you can't overcharge more than a sixth, okay, or underpay more than a sixth. So if you underpay more than a sixth, you have to compensate the owner. Okay, this is right. And you also did something prohibited, right? You have to give back the money. You did something wrong according to the Torah. Okay, it's forbidden to do that. Okay, so now Shmuel is going to say the following: 3 things he says, and the measurement for ona'ah is a sixth. So he says the following: Ein mosifin al hamidot yoter mishtut. This is what we talked about. When you make the measurements larger, if you decide that a pound is no longer a pound, but a pound, the pound we're going to use and call it a pound is really a pound plus a little bit more, you can't add more than a sixth. And again, the sixth is really what we would call a fifth. You can't add more than a fifth, which is really a sixth in there, the way they calculated it. If you wanted to up the value of a coin, okay, and say a shekel is no longer worth a shekel anymore, every shekel, we're going to add some. You're not really changing the measurement. What you're doing is you're saying that what we call a shekel, you're going to add a little more to it, because there it was made up of, whatever was made up of that had value. You're going to add to every shekel, and every shekel is now like a shekel 0.1 or a shekel right, up to 0.2. You can do it, but you can't do it more than that. But this would be deflation, basically, because you're upping the value of your money rather than, right, devaluing the money. And if you're going to make money off of something, you can't make money more than a sixth. You can't up your price, right, more than a sixth. Okay, there's a good footnote in the Quran which talks about why we do this nowadays, right? People definitely overcharge more than a sixth, and it's based on the market rate that goes on by people who aren't keeping these laws, and an interesting footnote about it, but not for right now. So Shmuel says the following: My time, what's the reason? Now, what he really wants to know is, why can't we add to midot more than a sixth? What's the issue? And what's really going to bother the Gemara, because we're going to go through 4 possibilities. Okay, it's also in the chart, each possibility and the rejection of it. So we're going to go through 3 other ones, reject them until we get to the 4th, which is the answer they accept, which is, why is the number a sixth? Okay, some of them, it should be even less than a sixth, should be a problem. Okay, so that's what's going to bother them. My time, if we're worried it's going to break the market rate. Okay, so if basically we start selling, okay, we call it a pound, but it's really now a pound 0.2. Now, obviously what's going to happen is, okay, it's not that they sell, let's say a pound costs $10. So they're not going to sell a pound now for $10. They're going to sell a pound for, right, if they up it to 1.2, they're going to sell it for 10.2, okay? It's going to up the price. Now, what happens when you up the price? People don't realize that you up the price because you changed, not everyone's going to know, it's that because you changed a pound to a pound 0.2, and that they're actually getting more for their money. They're going to think that the prices just went up. And what's going to happen? People are going to panic. When people panic, they're going to think there's not enough supply. They're going to all go out and buy, and that's going to jack the prices up way more. So that's possible reason number 1. But if we're worried the price is going to be jacked up much higher than a sixth, then hachinami shtutnami lo, then even a sixth is a problem. What did Shmuel say? Up to a sixth you can do it. Past a sixth you can't. But if it's going to up the prices more than that, then you can't even do it at a lower amount. So that can't be it. Option number 2, elamishum ona'ah, ki hechi delo lahave bitum mekach. Maybe it's because of ona'ah, so that we don't. Now, if it's because of ona'ah, well, what will happen if you up the prices, right? People might underpay because a seller might not know if you up the measurement. The seller might not know that they changed the measurement of a pound. And then they'll sell a pound thinking it's a pound, charge much less, and then it would be ona'ah, right? And that's why a sixth, Shmuel says, because up to a sixth, you can underpay, okay, but not at a sixth. Hamarava, kol davar shebemidah, v'shebemishkal, v'shebeminyan, afilu pachot b'chdei ona'ah chozel. But anything that's b'midah, b'mishkal, or b'minyan, according to Rava, anything that has an exact measurement, an exact weight, and it's sold by the weight, even less than ona'ah, even less than a sixth, you can claim, like if I'm a storekeeper and I sold a kilo for $10 because I thought it was still a kilo, I didn't realize it was a kilo 0.2, I can get back, if it was a kilo 0.1 and I sold it for a kilo, I can get back my money at any rate. So that would be even less than a sixth would be an issue. no matter what, we can get the money back. So that 6 doesn't make any sense there either. Ela mishum tagara, maybe it's for the merchants. So they won't have any loss. Now, a merchant is someone who buys and sells. And what do? They buy it for, $10 and they sell it for more, right? They sell it for up to a 6 more, basically. So now, if we lower it a 6, so then if it's up to a 6, it's fine. Because again, if the middleman, or middlewoman is selling it, and then they sell it for, they think they're making a certain amount of money, but it turns out they're not really, okay? So up to a 6, they'll break even, okay? So that up to a 6, it's okay because they'll at least break even. So they say. You can't possibly say that's what Shmuel says, that they have up to a 6 to play with because, you can do it up to a 6 because even if the merchants lose out, at least they won't lose any money on it. He says a great line. It's Ziana or Diana. There's different gears out here, which means loss. Ziana u'dololinti. You're right, he won't have a loss up to a 6. He'll break even. But Rav Chalobai, does he not need to make a profit? Zvan v'zabin tagara ikre. And what is a merchant if not someone who buys and sells it for more? If they basically spent all their time buying and selling and all they did was break even, that's basically a loss for them. So that, you're ruining business completely. That's what business is all about, making a profit. So for them, not making a profit is actually a loss. It's not like they break even. It's a loss. First of all, it's all their time they invested in this, and then they got nothing for it. That's a loss. That's a good line. Okay, so now we're up to option 4. Ela amrav chista, Shmuel kra eshkach udarish. Where do we get this from in the end? Shmuel found a pasuk, and that's where he gets this 5th. It doesn't have to do with any logic that we could come up with because, none of these really made any sense. But he darshan this pasuk. Okay, this pasuk happens to be in the middle of those pasukim in Yechezkel that we were reading. Just, I think, by chance. Okay? I mean, not so much by chance. By the way, this whole section in Yechezkel is talking about people who are using measurements and to cheat people and all that. HaShekel esrim geira. So they tell you a shekel is the weight of a shekel is 20 geira. The geira is not really important to us right now. Esrim shkalim, chamisha ve'esrim shkalim, asara ve'chamisha shekel. Okay, this is a very weird way of saying it. 20 shekels, 25 shekels, 15 shekels, which basically is 60 shekels. Okay, I don't know why they didn't just say 60 shekels, but it's basically 20 plus 25 plus 15, which is 60. Hamaneh yelachem. Okay, it should have started in the beginning and said the maneh, okay, which is a measurement that the rabbis knew about. A maneh, which we're going to talk about in a minute, is 100 dinarim, is 60 shekel. Okay, now that statement in of itself is completely problematic because a shekel is 4 dinarim. Okay, it's dinarim and zuzim, if you remember, the same. And a maneh is known to be 100 dinarim. How many shkalim is that? 25. If 4 dinarim to a shekel, so that's 25 shkalim. So the Gemara says, how could it possibly say in Yechezkel that a maneh is 60 shkalim when a maneh is 25 shkalim? Okay, and basically it's saying, Hamaneh 240 havu. According to this calculation, if a maneh is 60 shekel, then it should be 240 dinarim, and we know it's 100 dinarim. That's a huge discrepancy. Ela, so Shmuel says, I'm going to learn, they're claiming this is what Shmuel says, basically. Ela shmamina tlat, and with this we're going to finish the complicated part of our sugya. Shmamina maneshel kodesh kaful haya. Okay, first of all, they're telling you that Yechezkel was talking about a maneh used in the temple. The temple maneh was double the value of the maneh in the outside the temple. So if we call a maneh 100 dinarim, the maneh of kodesh was 200 dinarim. Ushmamina, but we have 240. How do we get from 200 to 240, or which is also 50 shekel to 60 shekel, because 200 dinarim is 50 shekels, divide by 4. Ushmamina mosifim halamidot ve'em mosifim yoter mishtut. The second thing we're going to learn is they obviously upped the value. The maneh of kodesh was 200, then they upped it, right? It was then changed to from 50 to 60, okay? So that's the difference of a sixth, that you can't add to the midot more than shtut. Ushmamina shtut milavar. And this we end with the section we talked about before. When we calculate a 6, we calculate it from the outside, meaning 60 minus a 6 gets you to 50. Okay, but if you did 50, it would be adding a fifth. Okay, but if you calculate it from the 60, then it's, right, the whole calculation is based on the higher number. You could still say 50 plus a sixth is 60, as long as you're saying that the calculation of a sixth is determined by the 60. A sixth of 60 is 10. And that's how we learn this, the basis of Shmuel's approach about adding up to a sixth. And Amar Ravina, last part of the section, Matnita Namidaika, you can infer this from the Mishnah, Dekatani. It says in our Mishnah, Hatodai Tabach Hamesh in Yerushalmiyot, Sheim Shesh Midbariyot Shmamina. What do you see here? The 6 Midbariyot turned to 5 se'ah, right? That was 6 se'ah, and later it became 5 se'ah, and that's all because what we talked about before, that the 5 becomes 6 because they added to it 5. Every se'ah became 1 and a fifth, basically, as opposed to 1. Okay, there we end that section. That was a complicated part. Now we're moving on to Amud Bet. I'm going to another Mishnah, but then we're going to come back to the things we learned in the first Mishnah in terms of how many loaves, and then we're going to get, and how many each loaf was made of. We're going to see the sources for that in the Gemara, and we're going to see the sources for what we're learning in this Mishnah. Mikulam hayanotel echa me'asara truma. So from all the 40, right, each of the types, 4 types, we're going to take 1 out of 10, out of the 10 loaves, and give it as truma to the Kohen. Shneimar v'ikriv mimenu echa mikol korban truma laHashem. Okay, this is a bit of a strange pasuk because it says you're supposed to, notice the first word, hikriv. It sounds like it's part of the sacrifice, and in fact, Rashi says there, Rashi in the Ketav Yad says, Kohen echa me'asara truma. Hayanotel Kohen. The Kohen would take it, which sounds like it's kind of like a sacrifice. It's part of the sacrificial part here, and maybe it's not exactly like Truma, and I think this is what's kind of underlying the whole sugya here. Is this like Truma? What happens in Truma? Well, when there's Truma, the Kohen doesn't take it, right? The owner gives Truma to the Kohen. That's the general Truma, the way it works. Is this a Truma, like the owner gives it to the Kohen, and later we're going to see a Braita where it says specifically the owner gives it? Or is it the Kohen takes it because it's part of the sacrificial, right? The kriv. Uses a different language than normally. Usually for Truma, it's v'natatem. You give. And this is v'kriv. It almost sounds like it's a sacrificial part of the sacrifice of the Korban Toda. That part of this goes to the Kohen, and that's a little bit different than saying that you have to give a part of it to the Kohen and share it with the Kohanim. Okay? So that's just something to keep in the back of your head. So from there they learn echad, shelo yitol parus. It says 1 from each type. That means you have to give a whole one and not a slice of one. That's how we're going to get to 10 in the end, because if you have to give 1/10, well, then it has to be that there's 10. Otherwise, you're going to end up giving a slice of one. Mikol korban, it says in the pasuk, from each korban, shu kol korbanot shavot. From there, we learn the number of each korban has to be equal. Shelo yitol mikorban chavero. Like, don't take, right, if you have an unequal amount, then you might take 1 loaf, and that will cover, more of one korban than the other. Like if you have 15 of one and 5 of the other, and you take, right, 2 loaves on those 15, well, you're ending up taking 1 loaf on 5 of these and 5 of the other. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. It goes to the Kohen who sprinkled the blood of the shlamim, which is of the animal that goes with this. And the rest is eaten by the owner, and that's what we said. They have to share it with people, because otherwise they can't possibly eat those all by themselves. Now, Tanu Rabanan. V'ikriv mimenu min hamechubar. So now the Braita, we're going to start with the Braita, where they're going to darshan a lot more things. We're going to have a very long Braita, and then slowly the Gemara is going to go back to different parts of the Braita, okay, both in this stuff and in the next stuff. So ikriv mimenu min hamechubar. They have to all be together. All the loaves have to be in one vessel or something, okay, all together when you take the maser from the truma from them. This, by the way, is like truma. When you take truma, they all have to be together. You can't have like some somewhere else. They're supposed to be all together. Echad shelo yitol parus. That's how we saw in the Mishnah already. 1, that it can't be a slice of it. Mikol korban, shu kol korbanot shavot. From there you see each korban has to be equal, even though we're going to see they're not equal in how much solid is in them, but they are equal in how many loaves there are and how many loaves are given from them. Shelo yitol min hakorban chavero. You can't take from one korban on the other. Truma laHashem. Now the pasuk calls this a truma to God. Eni odea mikamahi. I don't know how many though. Hareini dan. Now, at this point, we don't know, and we do know. We know there's 40 loaves, but the Torah never says 40 loaves. So now we're going to learn how do we get 40 loaves. Well, ne'amar kan truma, v'ne'amar b'truma ma'aser truma. It says by us truma, and by truma ma'aser it says truma. Okay, it's called the truma. What's truma ma'aser? It's also 1/10. It's when the Levi gets the ma'aser, which is a 10th. Then they have to take truma from it, and how much do they have to take? 1/10. The Levi has to give 1/10 of what they get from the other people. They have to give 1/10 of that to the Kohen. So that's how they learn 1/10. Okay, and that's how they learn it from Truma, because it's called Truma in the Pasuk. And in Truma Maaser, it's called Truma. Just like there, it's 1/10. It's also 1/10 here. But now the Gemara starts wavering. Maybe not, though. Maybe we'll learn from somewhere else, and we're going to do a lot of this in the next few sections, and there's charts on the page to help you out with it on the study guide. But maybe it's the other way. It also says by bikurim truma. And I think this is part of what I said before about, is it like bikurim, where that's like a ritual in the temple, as opposed to truma, which isn't a ritual in the temple, right? It's not, truma is you give to the Kohen something. Bikurim is very different. Like the Kohen gets the bikurim from it's a ceremonial thing. So ne'amar bikurim truma. It's also called truma. Okay, there's a pasuk that says truma yadecha, and they learn that those words are referring to bikurim. Mal halan en la shiur, avkan en la shiur. So maybe you'd say bikurim. We say that in our davening every day. Elu dvarim she'en lahem shiur. You can bring as much as you want. Maybe same thing with the lechmei todah. Maybe it's not 1 in 10. Right? If you learn it from Maaser, you'll get 1 in 10. If you learn it from bikurim, there's no measurement. Nir elami domeh. Danim truma she'en acharei truma. So now, which is it more similar to? This is what the chart is for. Danim truma she'en acharei truma, mi truma she'en acharei truma. We'd rather learn from something where truma is the end game. When you take truma Maaser, that's it. When you take the truma here, it's also it. That's it. You give 1 to the Kohen and you're done. Now, when do the bikurim start? When they start growing and your first fruit comes out on the tree, you already, or in the grains, you already mark it. Okay, they would put I think it was a red string or something. They would put something on it. I forget exactly what it is, but they would put something on it to mark it. Now, at that point, everything's attached to the ground. You still have this whole crop that's going to need maaser and truma after. So there's truma coming later. So that's very different from this, where truma is the end. Or maybe again, you could say the opposite. Danim truma ne'echelep. Again, let's try to see to what is it more similar. Maybe you'd say danim truma. So it's true that's similar to truma maaser because there's nothing else after it, rather than bikurim. But you could say danim truma ne'echelep b'makom kadosh. Truma ne'echelep b'makom kadosh. The bikurim have to be eaten in the temple, and so does this truma. The bread has to be eaten in the sanctified place. They have to be eaten in Jerusalem. Okay, the truma taken from the maaser can be eaten anywhere. Okay, thank you for clarifying, Miriam. That is a red string. Okay, Talmud Lamar. So in the end, logic could take you this way, logic could take you that way. What are we left with? Well, drasha on the pasuk. It says by truma maaser, and it says by our truma here, by the lechem hatoda, mimenu truma l'Hashem. Uktiba truma maaser, mimenu truma l'Hashem. The exact same words appear. So it's true, it calls the bikurim truma yadecha, but it doesn't say mimenu truma l'Hashem, which it says exactly here and in the truma maaser, l'gzera shava. So we make gzera shava, lamanu l'truma sheyacha me'asara. Okay, that's how we get it's 1 in 10. That's how we get the 40 loaves, because if you have to bring 1 of each type, and it's 1 in 10, from there we learned it's 40 loaves. But I still don't know. Psukim don't tell you now. In a lot of places it tells you exactly how many esronim and all that. It doesn't tell you that here. So how do we know how many esronim make up the lechem toda? Remember, there's 10 esronim for the chametz, and then 10 esronim for the matzah ones, which means isaron for challah and the challah in the chametz ones, and less. We're going to have a third. What we say? Sorry, let me pull it up for a second. You're going to have 3.3 for every type, and then you're going to end up with a third, 3 chalot for each isaron. So a third of an isaron for each challah. Okay? So now, how do we get to all these numbers in this chart, basically? So we got to the 10, 10, 10, 10 that we just explained. Now we're going to get to how do we know how many esronim. So I'll leave this up. Hareini dan. Ne'amar kan lechem, v'ne'amar lahalan b'shtei lechem lechem. Okay, here if we go down to the chart, we're going to now compare. The shtei lechem has an isaron per challah because there's 2 esronim in the shtei lechem, and that it says so in the pasuk. Ma lahalan isaron the challah. So you're going to have 1 isaron in each challah. Afkan isaron the challah. So also by us, you're going to have 1 isaron for every challah. That's how we get for the chametz ones, that they're an isaron per challah. Oh, kalech l'derech zo. But maybe learn it from something else. Maybe learn it from lechem apanim, okay? Where there, it's 2 esronim per challah. And then we're going to have double the size. Remember, an isaron is about 1 kilo, okay? So, which is about 2.2 pounds. V'ne'amar b'lechem apanim lechem. Okay, also says lechem by lechem apanim, and it says lechem here. So maybe we'd say, Malalan Shnei Esronot. Avkan Shnei Esronot. There it's 2 Esronot. Here it should be 2 Esronot as well. Well, Nireh Lemi Domeh. Again, we're going to do the comparison to which is the most similar. Well, Danim Mincha Haba Im Chametz Haba Chametz Im Hazevach. Mincha Haba Chametz Im Hazevach. 2 similarities to the Shtei Lechem. They're both chametz and they both come with an animal sacrifice. Lechem Apanim is not chametz and it doesn't come with an animal sacrifice. V'al Yochiach Lechem Apanim She'eino Ba Chametz Im Hazevach. Oh, Kolech L'derech Zo. Maybe go a different way. Dani mincha haba me'aretz v'chutz la'aretz min hachadash u'min yashan. The lechem hapanim can come from Israel. It can come, the sola can come from outside of Israel. It can come from the new crop. It can come from the old crop. Same thing with our lachmei todah. So we would learn that mincha haba me'aretz v'chutz la'aretz min hachadash u'min yashan. So learn one from the other. V'al yochichu shtei lechem. Remember the shtei lechem. It's like the omer. They have to come she'em ba'ot ela min hachadash. They have to come from the chadash u'min ha'aretz, from the land of Israel. So it's different. So maybe it should be more like the lechem hapanim. Talmud Lamal, mimoshvotechem taviu lechem t'nufa shtayim. Now this is a pasuk by the Shtei Lechem. Now the word taviu is unnecessary because it already said taviu in the previous pasuk, and this says bring it from your land. Right? That means from the land of Israel. She'ein Talmud Lomar taviu. The word taviu is unnecessary. Umat Talmud Lomar taviu. What do we learn from that? Shekol mashatam yivim mimakom achil hareyu kazeh. Anything you bring that's like this korban. Meaning, what's unique about the Shtei Lechem and our bread? They're chametz. Ma lahalani saron lechala, avkani saron lechala. So the word taviu there makes reference to anything else you bring is going to be like this, one saron for chala. To which they say, wait a minute, why, if you're already going to learn it from Shtei Lechem, maybe we'll learn now. Shtei Lechem is saron lechala, but for the whole thing, it's 2 esronim. So maybe you would say, ima lahalan shnei esronot for both of them altogether. Avkan shnei esronot. Maybe this is all supposed to be 2 esronot also. Talmud Lamar, Tihiyena, Lamanu Asara Lechame. Okay, so Tiena. The drasha is from the word Tiena. We're going to see this later in the Gemara, how they learn from Tiena. Say the word Tiena, which is in the pasuk about the Shtei Lechem, teaches you it's specifically 10. One isaron per chala. We'll get to which is 10 isronim altogether, and not 2 esronim altogether, which we'll get to later. Lamanu asara lechametz, asara lematzah minayin. So that got us the 10 of chametz. How do we know all the matzah ones are 10? Talmud Lamar al chalat lechem chametz, al chalot lechem chametz. After it listed the rikikim and all the matzah ones, it then says al chalot lechem chametz. So they say nega chametz avei matzah. Say those two are equal. There's chametz and there's matzah ones. So this gets 10, the other ones get 10 altogether, even though again they're 30 loaves. Nimtzu 20 esronim lachmei todah, 10 lechametz, 10 lematzah. Right. So again, 10 esronim, 10 for chametz, 10 for matzah. Yachol 10 shebematzah lo yu kulam ela mimin echad. Maybe the matzah ones are all one type. It's obviously ridiculous because the pasuk doesn't says so, and that's what we're going to see. Talmud Lamar, that's why the pasuk says, "Im al todah yikrivenu." If you're bringing a todah, he kriv al zevach todah chalot matzot blulot b'shemen rikikem matzot b'shulchin b'shemen solam urbechet. You need 3 types. Nimtzeu 3 esronim u'shlish mikol min v'shalosh chalot lisaron. So again, 10 esronim and 3 and a third for each one, and 3 chalot make up an isaron. Nimtzeu lachmei todah arba'im. No tell me. So in the end, you have 40. No tell me an arba, but no tell the kohen. Here's where the Breita says it. You take, the owner takes it and gives it to the kohen, as opposed to what Rashi said in the Mishnah, that the kohen takes it, right? But you give it to the kohen, v'ashar nechalim l'ba'alim, and the rest is eaten to the owner. Okay, now what they're going to do is they're going to go through the Breita in different parts of the Breita and go in depth. We're going to just do the first one right now and then finish up because it's late, and we'll leave the end of the daf for tomorrow. Amar mar, v'kriv mimenu min ha-mechubar. To say if the word mimenu means they have to be together, well, let's look at a different pasuk where it doesn't mean that. Et kol chebo yarim mimenu. You have to take out the fatty parts from the animal. Now, it doesn't mean the animal has to be all together. What kind of together is there for an animal? Hatam mai mechubar ikar. What kind of mechubar ikar? It's not like there's different pieces and they all have to be together. So they say, no, yes, it does mean the same thing. K'd'Rav Chisda Amar Ravimi, D'Amar Rav Chisda Amar Ravimi, shelo yinatach basar kodem she'itolim murim. What it means is you can't chop up the animal into pieces before you take the imurim out. You take the imurim out while the animal's whole. That's the same here as putting all the loaves together in a bowl and taking the truma from it. Okay, so there you have the mimenu could really mean that, and we'll continue on with other questions about this Breita as we go on until we get to the next Mishnah, which is near the top of tomorrow's daf. Okay, so let's finish up. By the way, I didn't mention this, but this was all in the Parsha yesterday, right? So I hope you appreciated that. I hope it's a good year to appreciate all these chapters in Vayikra, which are usually very complicated and distant from us. I know that these aren't the easiest Masechto, but there is certain advantage of finally understanding chapters upon chapters in the Torah that were before this kind of gibberish and not as comprehensible. Okay, so what did we deal with? The main thing we really dealt with is how much goes into this, how much flour. We had the whole calculation of all the se'ah and all of that and how we got to all the measurements. But really we wanted to get to how do we know how much esronim really are in, where we learn it from, how we got from the truma really. The truma was the key to figuring out how much. Since you need 1 loaf, that got us to 10 loaves of each. Right? Then we learned from the shtei alechem how many esronim you needed in each. And we had a lot of other comparisons trying to say, is this more like shtei alechem or lechem apanim? Is it more like bikurim or more like truma? Right? In the end, we learned it from truma, maaser. We learned it from the shtei alechem, and that's how we got to all the calculations. And within that, we had the statement of Shmuel that basically got us to this 6th, and what the meaning of Shmuel was. We had three options that were rejected till we finally understood that he really got his source from a pasuk in Yechezkel, and it wasn't really based on logic that this might cause that, about why you can raise the amount of the shirim, and that was all the source. The source for this whole thing was really our Mishnah of the 5 to the 6. Or the 6, which really changed to 5. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Shavua Tov, and maybe a quiet week, and Shin Shema B'Sorot Tovot.